Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. My name is John Barnes and I chair the committee. Immediately to my right is Charlotte Spenley, who is the head of finance, and to my left, the chief executive, Lorna Ford. Other officers I will name as we call on them. First item tonight is to agree the minutes. Are they a true and accurate record? I think everybody is unanimous on that they are. I will sign the meeting minutes at the end of the meeting. Apologies for absence.
An apology received from Councillor Thomas, Chair.
Yes. I gather Councillor Thomas's wife is ill and we ought to send a message of good wishes for her speedy recovery. Additional agenda items, are there any?
There are none.
Disclosure of interests and dispensations. Councillor Byrne.
Not too sure it's relevant, but member of Bexhill-on-Sea Town Council.
Online we have somebody.
Councillor Cooper.
Councillor Souter.
Just to declare that I sit on the Rother District Housing Company, items 8 and 9.
Yes. I think, like Councillor Byrne, I'm a bit hesitant, but I'm the Vice Chairman of Etchingham Parish Council. I don't think it has any relevance tonight, but just in case. Right. There are no dispensations as far as I'm aware. So we can turn to item 5, the internal audit report, and I will ask Gary Angel to present his report and to introduce the revised whistleblower policy. But I think we'll take the 3 audits first.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. Yeah, this is my usual quarterly report with this revised whistleblowing policy tacked on top, because I didn't know where else to put it because I already had 3 other reports. This report covers progress on the audit plan, audit activity in the third quarter of 25-26, progress made on the implementing outstanding audit recommendations, a brief update on the outcome of the accounts receivable project, and proposed amendments for the whistleblowing policy. Current position, which is in paragraph 3, it's pleasing to report that we're now back on track to complete the majority of the 2025-26 audit plan by the 31st of March. We've only got, there's one audit that's about to be released, and I think we've got 2 more on the go, and that's it. We're done. We issued 3 reports in the third quarter of 25-26. The executive summaries are in Appendix A as usual, that's on page 7 onwards. These reports were homelessness prevention initiatives, asset management and debtors. As usual, the main issues found in each of these audits are shown in the relevant executive summaries under the section entitled Level of Assurance. 2 of these audits provided substantial assurance, meaning that no significant issues were identified. However, the asset management audit only received limited assurance, meaning that improvements in controls or the application of controls were required. However, management have provided an update, which I've included in the blue box at the end, it's on page 11. This would appear to indicate that most, if not all, these issues have now been resolved, but I should hesitate to add that I haven't independently verified any of this yet, but it's looking promising. Implementation of the audit recommendations. Some progress this quarter. I'm glad to report. I follow them up as usual, and they're in Appendix B, pages 15 onwards. The old year's recommendations, I've got here, we've currently got 11 recommendations in this section, but we've had a little bit of an update since then, I'll tell you in a sec. It is 8 less than last quarter. Much of the progress is attributed to pressure applied from the director and both at director and heads of service level to resolve these old cases that have been hanging around for ages. It should be noted, however, that 2 of the recommendations removed this quarter were closed unresolved, and that's all explained in the Appendix B. A couple of updates on what I've got in the report. The SLA document that's the longest outstanding recommendation for ages. We're very nearly there now. Director of Resources has now got the document that's been agreed, and she signed it. You just need to get the other counterparts to sign it, and we're done. So it only took about 6 years. The other one is about refund of VAT on land charges fees, which were incorrectly deducted on the website. That's been resolved now, and we should be getting a £11,000 plus refund from HMRC on that. So got a bit more money for that. That's good. And there's one other case that's on track to be completed in the next few weeks. So looking much better now, but there's still a few hardcore of cases we need to clear. I hope that senior management will continue to keep the pressure on, and we start shifting the rest of them. Current year recommendations. Good progress continues to be made on the current ones. Don't say any more than that. Then there's a little bit in the report about the accounts receivable project. I thought I'd mention it because it's been quite successful. It was a group that Anna originally set up, and then Charlotte took over. But it's through various initiatives, they've managed to improve the information that goes to managers. So they've got no excuse now. They know they're getting told what debts are outstanding, so they can chase them up. It's also, because of raised awareness, we've managed to reduce the amount of debt by £400,000, which is, no mean feat. We're only talking about sundry debt here, by the way, not revenues. Finally, a whistleblowing policy. Like I say, it's just tax.
Shall we leave whistleblowing?
Okay. Fine. Any questions then?
So we'll leave whistleblowing for the moment. We'll tackle any issues that people want to raise on the remainder of the report. The obvious one really is to congratulate those who are responsible for debt collection. I think we're making substantially better progress with the outstanding recommendations, and I think the Chief Executive and her team have got that very much under control. The only one which is slightly troubling, and I don't entirely think it's the fault of the present team of officers, is whether we've got a complete terrier or not. Our asset list is historic, and I think what has happened is, as we actually want to devolve assets, we've discovered assets that we didn't know we had. I myself, as a member of Ettingham Parish Council, had to arrange for a photograph to be sent to say that a car park in the village was signed as the property of Roller, but Roller didn't know it existed. And that goes back to days when it was supplied to council housing, which is now mainly private, which is quite interesting. So that kind of blip is still occurring, but the new team are actually gripping the issue and really report substantial progress. So I hope actually when Gary does his next check, he'll confirm that. Are there any other questions anybody wants to raise? No, silence, which is good. Gary, can we turn next to the whistleblowing policy and just spend a little
Certainly.
time?
Yeah, this is just, it's an amendment I've had to make to it as a result of the Employment Rights Act 2025. It's just to allow workers who report sexual harassment work to be treated as a protected disclosure under the legislation for whistleblowing, and so it's just a little thing to add to it. I mean, I think they could all, you could report it before under one part of the Act. I can't remember. But this makes it clear you can do it now. And hopefully, we're not going to get too many of them, but, you know, it's there if we need it.
Are there any questions, Gary, about that change? In which case, I think we need to recommend, presumably this one will have to go to council for approval. So we will recommend that the amendments to the whistleblowing policy are accepted. Yep. The internal audit report, I think, can be noted. We then move to the item 6, the amendments to the Constitution. And we have two protocols in front of us. One is correcting a legal error. Hybrid meetings cannot count towards the 6-month rule for councillors. But we also have made some, having had a meeting of the Constitution Group, we also made some minor tweaks to the member-officer relationship document. We think that is working well, but we're not sure every officer is fully aware of it. And I think Councillor Byrne has one particular remark to make, which will be useful.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the protocol is fine, but I don't think all of our officers feel that they're empowered to say to a member, please, can you make this request to my team leader or my head of service? So you get this situation where a member is required a response, the person who is supposed to be responding is either overloaded or busy, or they've actually got it wrong, that the member has gone to the wrong person. And sometimes there's just a gap that seems like silence. And it's not anybody's fault. Well, it's sometimes the fault of the member for not having gone to the head of service in the first place. But I think, and we had this discussion on overview and scrutiny, that officers should, this should work for officers as well as members. It isn't just members being empowered, it's officers being empowered to say either, please take this up with my head of service, because I think it's an unreasonable request and it will take me 2 days to answer. So just getting the balance right. The actual protocol, I think, is fine. It's getting the balance of implementation right.
From my own point of view, I find that what works very satisfactorily is if I contact a junior officer, I always copy in the head of his team. And that way I find that I'm keeping the head of the team involved. But obviously I'm not bothering with a matter that really could be handled by somebody much more junior. And I think with that kind of sort of practical guidance to members and some guidance to officers, we've got a very good working relationship going. And I think we're liable to make slightly heavier weather than we need of the slight amendments we've got in front of us. Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. On the member officer protocol, I think Councillor Barnes is right. Overall, we have really good relationship between members and officers at Rotherham, and we're really fortunate that be the case. I have worked at places where it's not as easy. But sometimes I think the request for information or perhaps some chasing that is done by members isn't going to the right place. So I think there's a little bit of kind of training both in terms of members' behaviour and in terms, as Councillor Byrne said, of officers knowing when it's appropriate to push back. So this protocol does try to clarify the relationships and the fact that most inquiries should go to a head of service level, really, but I do accept on a practical basis, such as planning, and perhaps you want to speak to the case officer, that might be a little bit different. So we do intend to include this in the staff induction programme. It's not at the moment. So that's something that we need to do, and also at a managers forum. So that's all of the members of staff who manage another person. we'll have some kind of, it's not really training, it's just a briefing and an awareness that the protocol exists. So I do think it's helped to clarify it, and hopefully moving forward it will just be much clearer. Thank you, Chair.
That's good to know, and thank you.
If there's... Councillor Biggs.
Sorry, when we talk about getting involved with officers, is there, I've had this conversation before, is there a set time when they should actually come back to you? Nothing's mentioned in any of the reports. Is there like, should you give them a week, should you give them 10 days to respond? Because as councillors, we get emails come through from our residents all the time, and we like send an email, and the next day they're expecting us to have a reply, which is not feasible. So is there actually anything in the protocol, anything where it says a set amount of days should be given, and if you haven't by that time heard from them, then obviously we need to move on somewhere else?
Back. I think it's really tricky because it does depend on the complexity of what's been asked, but what's really, really important is that the councillor knows that the inquiry's been dealt with, and you can then manage the expectations of the person that's contacted you. And I think that communication is really, really important. I think it's difficult to say everything will be dealt with in 5 working days or whatever, because sometimes they're by their very nature they can be quite complicated requests, but that's something I will raise at Managers Forum and get some sort of real life feedback from people that are dealing with these inquiries, and I do agree that it would be helpful to set those expectations.
I don't think it's, the reply was not for them to come back with the question I've asked, but for them to acknowledge that an email has been sent to them, because sometimes you send the email, obviously you can go through Teams, which is perhaps a better way of doing it. If you send an email, sometimes you don't get a reply, and that's what I was trying to aim. Should they just either acknowledge you to say, I've received your email, we're looking into it? It's if you don't receive a reply back from an officer, how long should you wait? That was a question I meant. Not for them to give me a decision on the question, it's just how long should they actually come back to you?
To be fair, I'm actually amazed how many officers come back on the same day. Even if they can't give you the information, they at least acknowledge that they've had the request. I think that's good practice. So I think, again, the Chief Executive might mention that. Sometimes it's difficult. They're away on a holiday or something like that. But then you usually get an automatic indication that that's the case.
It wasn't a criticism, it was just a case of just
No,
trying
no,
to raise the point to say, was there a time scale? That was all.
I think if there is an area which probably needs a bit of attention, sometimes after the initial response, the follow-up response sometimes takes an age to come. And you're reluctant to hurry them up, but yet you feel really you can't say to your constituent what is happening about it. So I think having some understanding that a relatively prompt message back, if a constituent is involved, would be helpful.
I think that's where diplomacy comes in, John.
We've said all that needs to be said. Can we agree to recommend to the Council that the amendments to the formal hybrid protocol and the member officer protocol, which are set out before you, are approved and adopted? All in favour? Agreed. I'm sorry, my voice has suddenly gone hoarse. We move on to the review of internal audit, page 51.
Chair. It's got 2 bits in it really. We've got the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme, which I've talked about my self-assessment. It's also got a bit about performance measures. So the first part, the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme, the report sets out my annual self-assessment and the effectiveness of Robert's internal audit service, comparing us to our professional standards. It's the first full review I've done against the new global internal audit standards, UK public sector. It was carried out using a spreadsheet toolkit produced by the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. Now, this contains 280 rows of information across 5 separate worksheets. I've shared this with the chair, and I'm happy to share it with anyone that asks for it, but it's a bit involved. This is why I've given you a summary in the report, which is quite light on the areas, but it only really points out what you need to know really from the main summary, because it covers 15 principles and 52 standards, so there's a lot of ground to cover. The level of compliance for each domain, principle and standards indicated in the summary by generally conforms, partially conforms or does not conform. Generally conform being the highest you can possibly get, so you can't expect it to be 100% anything. When the item does not conform or only partially conforms, there's an explanatory comment in the notes column. In summary, no shortcomings were highlighted by this latest review, which leads me to the conclusion Rover's Internal Audit Service now generally conforms with the new standards. Appendix B on page 65 provides an update on the last year's action plan, and most of those action points have been addressed as part of the process of getting it aligned with the new standards. The latest review also highlights 2 minor issues where additional work could be undertaken to further enhance the compliance, and these go straight into the action plan for next year, which is in Appendix C. There was a third area about performance measures, and this committee agree on those, and that's the next item we're going to talk about, performance measures. So on para 10 on the report on page 52, you can see the 5 performance indicators that I currently report each year to the committee. I've done the same ones for quite a few years now, and I don't think I've ever asked you if you think they're the right ones or not. So the standards have pulled me up on that, and I'm now giving you the opportunity to influence what I report on for the next financial year. In paragraph 12, you've got some suggested performance measures there. I'm hoping you won't want to adopt them all, including the ones that we're doing, but just maybe drop some and replace or whatever. That's, it's up for you to decide. And that list isn't exhaustive either. In paragraph 12, you might think of something else that you might want to debate whether you include it or not. So at the end of this meeting, I really need you to decide what you want me to measure next year, and be minuted, and then I can do that from the next financial year. So over to you, really.
Yes, thank you, Gary. I think we've made remarkable progress in actually updating to meet the new standard, which is, of course, much more specific. And I suggest, first of all, before we turn to performance indicators, if anybody wants to say anything about that, I did take up with Gary the point about continuous professional development. Of course, the opportunities for that with a small staff are pretty limited, but of course it's a stable staff, so in a sense it's probably less urgent than we had new members of staff, but I know Gary's got it in mind to see what can be done about it. Beyond that, are there any other points anybody else wants to make? Having an easy run tonight. We now turn to paragraph 10 and paragraph 12. Paragraph 10 is the existing indicators, and I think we would all agree that those should continue. Are there any in paragraph 12 that you want to add? It did seem to me that the first one of the potential performance indicators was an obvious one to add. Are there any others that people would want to add? The other one which I looked at with some interest is the percentage of outstanding applications followed up each quarter. I would have thought that might also be worth adding. Can I propose that from the chair? And is it agreed? Yep. I'll take silence for consent. With those two additions, can we approve the performance indicators for the year? We now move on to one of the more difficult ones. I think Anna, I hope, has benefited from her short period of leave. She briefed me before she went away, and we both agreed with the Middle East situation. Much of what is here is a bit up in the air because nobody knows how that is going to develop. I gather the markets have been up and down all day with each nuance in the headlines. So very difficult to guess. Anna, do you want to introduce, and I'll talk a bit about what I think are the new risks and what I don't think there's much we can do to mitigate them, but there we go.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to mention first that the risk register and the risk policy and also the risk appetites contained in the risk policy went to Cabinet in February. So Cabinet has reviewed the policy, they're happy with the amendments and also the risk appetites. If you've had a chance to look at the Cabinet paper, you'll see that our risk appetite is quite low for most things, particularly around the financial side of things and also the projects. So that's just to let you know, because last year the policy came to this committee to be approved, but it's gone to Cabinet with some very small amendments. So thank you for the introduction. I've highlighted the main risks in the report where they exceed the risk appetite. They're very similar to the ones that we had at the time of the last report. The first one being local government reorganisation and the uncertainty that that is causing. Obviously, we're getting quite near to the point when we will find out what our future holds, but until then and even afterwards, it does remain quite uncertain. Financial risk won't be any surprise to anybody that this still exceeds our risk appetite for lots of reasons, including now the reason about the Iran war and the increased cost of borrowing. Economic and financial failure to operate within a sustainable budget. Again, that very, very much exceeds our risk appetite. We've still got the risk in there, and that will remain, I think, forever, about significant breach of data protection. It's just getting ever more sophisticated in terms of the hacks and everything. I did want to bring out the risk 10, the financial risk concerning the housing company, because we are at a very critical point in terms of borrowing. And now with the added risk of the Iran war and the cost of borrowing going up, we are reliant on homes being sold at the price they need to be sold at and the rate that they need to be sold at, even though we do have very strong mitigations in place with the 130 units being sold to the registered provider, but that still is one of our biggest financial risks. And then finally, I've got the risk that I know is close to parish and town councils' hearts about the strategic asset management plan and the devolution of assets prior to LGR. It is a very big programme of work to be done, and any legal delays will cause a risk to delivery of that project. So, yeah, very happy to take questions.
Yes, I must say I think the financial risks from higher interest rates, apart from the problem with housing, may mitigate itself, because I think Charlotte and her team are rather good at using the monies that pass through our accounts, and higher interest rates will benefit that. So we may derive income from that to offset the increased costs of borrowing. But it does seem to me that we're going to have to live with higher interest rates for quite a considerable period of time, because even if the war comes to an end, clearly I think our own position nationally is such that the bondholders are liable to charge us a lot more than they charge some other economies. And I think that's a fact of life. The other one, apart from car park revenue, which I think, given the price of diesel and petrol, is bound to be affected, is obviously cost of living, and that could increase the number of council tax debts, and it could also affect people applying to us for homelessness. So there is quite a lot, and I think it will probably materialise in some form or other. So we may need to make some revisions. The other one which does strike me as actually materialising is one which is out with our control, but is nevertheless crucial to us in planning terms, and that is the actual delivery of completed houses. And the housing market, as we all know, the housing associations are not building at the moment, houses are not selling, and that means that we are going to remain very vulnerable on land supply, and I think that's bound to continue for some considerable time to come. None of that is a very good picture, and I suspect our legacy to the unitary authority, if the government doesn't change its mind, is not going to be as good as I would have hoped. But there we go. Comments, people?
Thank you, Chair. Really, this is about the housing company. We already have a commitment from Audit to purchase how many of the houses? And
130, I think.
And that is absolutely cast iron, is it? There's nothing in there that can be affected by the fact that, you know, interest rates are going up or whatever. Did we get that in place and fully nailed down before things started to change, I think is what I'm asking.
Yes. In short, it's places for people, actually, the registered provider. But yes, I mean, assuming that the units are delivered to the quality and the standard that's been agreed in the contract and there's no default of contract, yes, that's a committed purchase.
So we got that all tidied away before the world went mad. Great, good.
Councillor Biggs.
Thank you, Chair. With that one, risk 10, it says we're reaching our peak debt position. Can you enlighten me on that? When you say peak, how much are we talking about?
Charlotte.
35 million is current forecast of peak debt. We're at about 30 right now. So all peak debt means is literally as it sounds. That's the highest level of debt that we anticipate at the moment based on current forecasts that the organisation will require by way of loans from the council.
Second question is then, if when they sell the houses, and I'm assuming some are ready to be sold, are they? The money they get from the houses is reinvested back for the next lot of houses. So would that decrease debt we have to, or loan we have to give them?
Yep, so there's quite a complicated cash flow that sits behind everything. It's shared with us monthly. It's managed by RDCHC. But yes, I mean, in effect, there is still, there are still units being built. There is still expenditure that's being incurred. And yes, so there are, Councillor Cooper might know better than me. I think there's a small handful of units handed over, I think less than 5, at this point. There's a few more in the pipeline, almost ready to be handed over to the registered provider for their units. So that income, the start of income flowing from the registered provider will probably come quicker than the open market sales. But yes, we are very dependent still on open market sales, and that's what this risk is trying to express. The council currently has lent the housing company, as per all the agreed documents, £30 million. So we're very exposed at this point to those open market sales. So what we're trying to highlight here is that whilst all the mitigations are in place and the contractor's performance is strong and the housing company's performance is strong, for an authority of our size, there's still a really significant risk. Once those open market sales start to flow through, and the housing company have done an excellent job in bringing forward some of the registered provider units because they are secured income and the registered provider is in a position to take them sooner. So they've brought some of that forward, which is also helping with the cash flow position and minimising the peak debt position, because it was at one time forecast to be slightly higher than 35 million. So everything that can be done is being done, but here we are trying to express the level of risk that we face, particularly in this 12-month period whilst we're at peak debt.
Thank you for the explanation.
Yes, I think at some stage the shareholder committee of Cabinet will have to think about financing a number of small projects if the housing company is to build up capital of its own. And of course, small developments helping the small builder in the high Weald would actually be a very useful way of taking the housing company forward. But of course, many of these decisions will not be for us, probably. But the housing company needs some capital of its own and not be wholly reliant on borrowing from us. Any other comments? No, in which case, I think we simply note the report at this stage. I've no doubt the Chief Executive will alert the Cabinet to the current situation at an appropriate moment, but I don't think we need to make any specific recommendation. We then move to the internal audit plan for 2026-27. Gary, would you introduce that plan, please?
Thank you, Chair. Last one for me tonight. Yeah, this is the annual report on what we're planning, our work plan for the coming year. And I just need members' approval for its adoption. In summary, this report details the steps I've taken to prepare the plan itself, and the resources required to deliver it. It also lists other audit areas considered but not included in the plan for transparency. The assurance map mentioned on para 5 and is in Appendix A. This is an attempt to try and look for gaps in coverage of assurance. I've gone through all the different columns on that report, and as per the methodology in Appendix B, and two areas have highlighted from that as high and medium risk, both feature in the new audit plan. So that was, from memory, it was estates and health and safety. The audit plan itself and resources, which is para 13 onwards, that's compiled based on my own risk assessment I do every February. All activities need to be high are automatically included in the new plan, except where they have only recently been reviewed or already monitored elsewhere. The rest of the plan is made up of annual governance audits and any medium risk areas that have not been reviewed recently. The audit plan's in two parts. You've got the plan itself, which is in Appendix C, and Appendix E shows you the resources that will deliver that plan. The content of the plan has been discussed with heads of service, and the final version is supported by the Chief Executive. The new plan allows for 512 days of audit work across 19 separate audit, reviews and consulting activities. However, it's unclear at this stage how much of the work, how much impact LGR will have on this work and managers' capacity to serve the audits in the plan. So I will have to therefore come back to this committee at a later date to adjust the plan if impact is causing us issues. It's another unknown of LGR, I'm afraid. For transparency, I've mentioned this. Appendix D is the audits we haven't done. So having seen the plan, hopefully members will agree it provides a good audit coverage across a wide range of activities. And over to you, any questions?
I must say I found the rather assurance map a very interesting document, as always. Are there any questions to Gary on either the methodology or the coverage? Do we feel the coverage actually is reasonable across the whole of the council's business? Is the question we need to address. Councillor Byrne, you look pregnant with a question.
It's only the way I'm sitting. No, I was thinking that there are all sorts of unknowns with LGR coming down the track, but as far as I can see, our audit, the whole of our audit strategy is still fit for purpose, because there's no areas that we don't know about. We just don't know about things in those areas, and the audit of those areas, I think, is adequate.
Anybody else wish to comment? In which case, I'm taking as silence means approval of the internal audit plan. Can we all signify in the usual way? That is unanimous. Before I proceed to the work programme, just to update you that we did manage to secure an independent member, but unfortunately he has to be appointed by the council. He is sitting in the audience tonight. Welcome, Mr. Davis. I hope next time you'll be sitting with us at this table. But I thought I would introduce you to a very, very experienced man indeed. Very welcome. The work programme is on pages 113 to 14. I don't think it has changed in any significant aspect, and I take it that nobody has anything that they wish to add to it or detract from it. Charlotte.
Not add to or detract. I just wanted to flag a couple of things, if I might, Chair. One, to say that I will, after this meeting, explore some dates with the Chair and then subsequently with committee members for us to undertake our self-assessment, which we'll do via a Teams meeting, because we need to report that to the June meeting. And it's best to do it with the current committee because you've got the year's experience of how the committee's performed and undertaken self-assessment. And the second thing I just wanted to flag is that I propose to leave the items where they are on the work programme for now, but just to make you aware, our external auditors are keen to commence our audit much earlier this year, and therefore they're likely to they're already doing interim audit work, but they're likely to commence our audit in June. So it possibly will change some items. For instance, we may bring the annual governance statement to the 8th of June as opposed to the 20th of July, but we're just working through all the practicalities of them coming a bit earlier at the moment. So just flagging it for information, Chair. Thank you.
I think we know the warning, and it may be that we shall want to take a look at risks a little more often while the current situation goes on, which may or may not affect the work programme. So I look to Anna to advise us on that. But with those remarks, can we approve the work programme as it is in front of us? Everybody happy with that? In which case, at remarkable speed, can I declare this meeting of the Audit Committee closed at 7:14.